Welcome to History 2010. I'm Dr. Sawyer. I'll be your professor for today and hopefully for the rest of the semester. How you guys feeling? Anybody got good news? Anybody got good news? So far, all you guys are here, which I still am deeply appreciative of. I mean, at this point, all of you guys have seen what it looks like when I have to record a lecture without anybody there. You guys catch that? It was all I could do, guys. It was all I could do. You guys saw what happens whenever I don't have students in front of me and I'm not like actually talking to people. So that was that. But I feel like it patched it in. Did you guys see my FAQ video on how to take notes? Yeah, if you guys saw that. Did you guys see that? Was that helpful? Did that make sense to you guys? Okay, cool. Keep sending them to me because if I get a question from like a couple of people, like if you send me a question, like one person sends a question, like I'll usually write you back. But if it seems like it's something that a couple of people got, like I know that you guys like in your generation, it's just y'all came up watching stuff more than you came up like reading dense text. So I'm happy to do that. I was actually just talking to the chair of the department about that today, about how it's like funny because you know what the best type of media is? You know what the best type of media is when you're teaching a class? You know what it is? It's the one that connects the best with the people in your class. That's it. I mean, that's it. It's like we get old and stodgy and we're like, no, you must read these books. But it's like, no. Like it's all a form of, it's all a medium, right? It's all a medium. And so let me know like what works best for you guys. Again, I appreciate the feedback from everybody. It's been really good. Let's get rolling with this class. We're going to pull up the old screen share here, the old screen share. Just start off by saying that this Thursday and Friday we have the discussion sessions. Again, they'll be about every other week, but that's all in your calendar, so make sure you're staying up to date on that. To review where we were last time, what do you guys remember from the last lecture? Anybody? What do you guys remember? What stood out from the last lecture? We talked about the founding of the colonies. We ran through a bunch of them. What stands out?
Georgia really doesn't like lawyers.
Georgia doesn't like lawyers. Isn't that hilarious? I thought I was like, man, look at this list. In fact, I'm hosting a trivia game for a bunch of state legislators on Wednesday, and that's going in there because it's not just legislators; it's also lobbyists and like policy people. Oh, anyway, I just thought that was too good not to use in a trivia game for a bunch of lawyers. Anyway, so no lawyers in Georgia. Right. And I haven't had the time to sit down and like learn more about that. But there were restrictions. It was a prison basically founded by James Oglethorpe as a retreat for former prisoners. Right. That were supposed to come there and be the new citizen soldiers of the new world. Excellent. Was that the same thing they were doing in Massachusetts Bay? Was it pretty much the same thing as Massachusetts Bay?
It was the Puritans, right?
Yeah. And what did their life look like?
Well, they pretty much kept to themselves, really, and they kept like their own little section of religion and beliefs, and then anyone who challenged it, who came in and challenged their beliefs, were like, you're out.
Yeah, one way or another, you're out. Absolutely. And so we saw that, and then we talked about Jamestown, right? And Jamestown is founded by a company. It's a business. And you know, sometimes I say, well, maybe I won't go through all of these. Of course, I leave some out, right? I don't talk about Delaware, right? I don't talk too much about, a couple of the colonies. The reason that I go through all of these is, again, one really important thing to understand the significance of this revolution that we're coming up to in this class is to know that these aren't folks who think about themselves as anything alike. I mean, certainly things have changed by the time you get to the 1760s, but these origins are fundamentally different. The stories, right? The origin stories of these colonies, so different. And so to appreciate that will allow you to appreciate what's going to happen here moving forward. I don't know why my audio stopped recording. Wait, okay. There we go. Sorry, I had to get a sync click on that. So all of these places are different. And we left off talking about the differences in life and how just things were changing. One of the results of having these religious groups in the North was that they were Protestants, right? They weren't. Well, they were Church of England. My point is they were reading the Bible, and so they did things like found Harvard, right? They set up colleges and set up schools to teach people how to read, to engage the Bible. The impact of this is that New England has a population that is incredibly literate. And that's going to matter. And that's going to actually move down. Philadelphia is as well. And you don't think about really the impact this has, but you should, because if you're going to start trying to bring together people from across up and down this coast, you've got to have a way to communicate. And if you're going to have a big revolution, the ideas have to be communicated to a large group of people. And so that means that being able to read and write as a population, that's powerful, because you can convey information in a way that you couldn't if you had to do it all by word of mouth. So all that's fundamentally important. We talked about how the slave system set the South on track for a very different economic future than the North. Talked about how the expansion of slavery played out. All of these things are essentially in that lecture planting seeds for you to better understand where we're going moving forward. Any questions before we move on? No? All right, cool. So this is where we were last time. We were talking about the literacy aspect. Alcohol is really important. You guys read that, huh? You guys read about alcohol? Yeah, what did you guys learn about alcohol? Except for only people who are over 21, because the rest of you guys haven't been sanctioned to have alcohol. And since it's illegal, we know that anyone who's under 21 has never knows about alcohol. So anyone who's over 21, can you tell me about why alcohol was important? Is anyone over 21? Just me? Okay, never mind. Forget that you read that stuff about alcohol, because it would be wrong if you read it about alcohol, even though it was legal to buy beer when you were 18 into the 1980s. Anyway, it's weird how laws can change the way that we think about things. Be careful. Not necessarily good for you, just a reminder. All right, so actually the reason alcohol was really important was because the water was bad. You didn't know what the heck was going to be in the water. So if you can brew some type of a cider, and it's low alcohol stuff, right? I mean, they're not trying to crank it up there. They're not making these IPAs back then. Most of what they're drinking is like beer or wine, right? I mean, wine, they when the apples come in, right? They can't grow grapes because the climate's not very good. They have trouble with that. But the orchards provide cider, and it's fermented, which means that it's free of diseases. Alcohol also forms something that people come together around. And this is an interesting thing that happens during the revolution, is that pubs become really places where debates happen. People in the town come together and center up, and alcohol provides this, this public house, which is, pub short for a public house. They come together, they debate. It's really, really, really essential to life. Now, let me tell you the last thing about life in the colonies, because it's not all drinking cider and reading newspapers. It's not. It's actually mostly not that at all. People pretty isolated, a lot of them. I mean, you got the people that are along the coastline, but you move further inland and people are, they live a distance away from other folks. And this means that knowledge can be harder to come by, but it also means that, remember how I told you there's a lot of malaria in the South? There's smallpox. That's an issue. Okay. People live their lives with a lot of diseases, but in the early colonies, you basically can't find a doctor. And this is going to sound weird, but it's probably better if you can't find a doctor. Because people who call themselves doctors at this time, or medical experts, they're not exactly rolling in with what you think of as medicine. I mean, at this point, they're still largely going back, and their notion of how the body works is based on ancient Greek notions of the balancing of fluids in the bodies. This is why they're going to be bleeding people, dude. I mean, that was basically it. If you found a doctor, it didn't matter what. They're going to be like, probably too much blood. That was their solution. You'd walk in, you'd be like, doctor, my stomach's been hurting for days. He'd be like, think we're going to bleed you. You want to be like, doctor, I've got terrible headaches. Think I'm going to bleed you. You walk in and be like, doctor, I'm bleeding to death. He'd be like, sounds like it's going to solve itself. Walk it off. Walk it off. That's the way medicine basically worked. It gets better as you get closer to the revolution, but more or less, it's really imprecise, and it's nothing like what you would expect today. Now, there are, however, people at this time whose work in healthcare does seem to have had a positive impact on those they worked with. Can anyone guess what type of a person? We actually mentioned it in a previous lecture. What type of a... Anybody got an idea? Think about healthcare. Think about those that are taking care of others. Nobody? Nobody want to take a swing at this? It's midwives. Midwives. And it's funny, I mean, that tell you something about how we think about medical professionals. You dismiss these folks, and these folks have a specialty, right? I mean, they're not like, oh, I'm giving birth to a baby. It's like, all right, well, you're going to lose a lot of blood, so you don't need me. These folks actually, they have experience. And it makes sense because they have a very specific skill set that they work with women. They do it regularly, right? It's not like a one-time thing. I mean, they're constantly, they have this specialty, this focus. And in most towns or most regions, there's a person, a woman who knows how to help a woman get through childbirth. And you're talking infant mortality rates are crazy high at this point. Women die in birth. It's a common thing. So having someone around that knows how to do that and take care of both the child and the mother is really important and has dividends. By the way, the person that I mentioned that was a midwife before was Ann Hutchinson, the one they ran out of Massachusetts Bay. I would like to say that I asked you guys if you want to take a swing at the only medical professional, or the only type of medicine that worked in the colonies. Thank you guys for remaining silent on that one instead of just blurting things out. Because I've asked groups of students before what they think might be a medical professional that's effective at this time. And I've gotten people who have said magic, voodoo, and sorcery. Those have been 3 real questions. And I'm like, dude, I told you guys this class was going to be brilliant on day 1, but you're going to need to manage your expectations. It's regular Earth, all right? I know it's a long time ago. We're not in Middle Earth, all right? There's no elves running around here, no orcs. So yeah, it's not that special, I guess. Actually, it's special. It's just not that magical. Also, smallpox is an interesting thing at this time. Wait a second. We're going to start over, all right? Hey, could you say something that means nothing? Absolutely. Smallpox was an interesting thing at this time. Wow, you said the word smallpox and then you said nothing specific after that. Anyway, it sounds like I'm lying on the stand. We did some interesting things I cannot recall. No, so in the colonies, people have smallpox. And let me tell you the story about this. It's really where you see some of the first discovery of people understanding the principles of inoculation. In other words, that if someone is exposed to a certain type of virus or bacteria or whatever it may be, that they then can build up an immunity without getting the full-blown disease. And smallpox is the first one. And this is not going to happen, actually. Like, this is not a real discovery until just after the Revolution. But you start seeing it practiced in some kind of ways earlier. So most diseases like this jump from an animal. Right? Smallpox jump from cows, right? Chickenpox jump from sharks, exactly. No, chickens, that was obvious. So you have all these diseases that jump from one animal to another. And again, I mentioned before that this is an impact of or an outcome of human beings in Europe living in close proximity to animals, right? Having farm animals and things like this. So people don't understand how diseases work, but they do notice that milkmaids, the girls who milk the cows, that they tend to not get very severe cases of smallpox when there are outbreaks, and sometimes they don't get it at all. And that leads them to realize eventually, these people that are scientists at the time, that it's likely because they are in close proximity with animals and they are exposed to some version of the cowpox that then allows them to have an immune system that can fight off smallpox more efficiently. So they figure out this principle. But let me tell you, any of you guys who are scared to go get a shot at the Walgreens or the CVS or whatever weird pharmacy you got, but don't get one from an alley, all right? Don't get one from a dude who's trying to hustle people out there handing out flyers, being like, you want some inoculations? Inoculations. Also, we have drugs. Don't get one from there. Get one from a legit place. But you got. Let me tell you this, all right? Everything matters when you put it in perspective, I think. All right. So the way the first inoculations were, they were called variolations. And here's how they worked. To expose someone to a small amount of smallpox, to hopefully make them either immune or to make them have lighter cases if they get it. When there was a smallpox outbreak, people would go find people who were dying from smallpox. I don't know if you've ever seen a picture of what smallpox looks like, but basically your skin turns into whelps filled with pus, and it covers your whole body. And one of the major reasons that you die from smallpox is because the lumps come from outside your skin, inside your mouth, and start growing down the roof of your mouth and tongue and into your throat, and you suffocate. So anyone dying from smallpox, right? They're like, oh, there's no chance. They're not looking too good. But you'd find someone like that, and you would essentially cart them around from house to house, and you would go into the person that you were going to treat. You would take a knife and you would put a cut somewhere on the person who's getting the treatment's body. Then you would go, preferably outside. Hopefully they weren't bringing these folks inside. They'd go outside to the dying person and they would cut open one of those pockets of pus and blood on their arms. And they would rub the knife in it, and they would walk back inside and they would rub that into the cut that they had made on your arm. Essentially putting that right into your bloodstream. Yeah, you guys, how's that shot sound? How's that shot at CVS sound? All right? Like, people went through this. This was just normal. It was like when you were a kid, you were like, I don't want to get a shot. It's like, don't worry, we're not getting a shot, kid. You see that guy over there? He's not doing too well. Let's walk over to him. Who's got a knife? That was life. But the craziest part was that there's no precision. They don't know how much they're putting in you. I mean, people, over time get good at it, I guess. But there's still no way to be like, we're exposing you to exactly this amount. So sometimes what would happen is you would go in for the variolation and you would just get smallpox and die. But it was regular that you would get at least a low-level case of smallpox. But you don't know which way it's going. So you're kind of like, I'm not feeling well. Is this going to be it for me? But just so you know, what I just explained to you, with the risk of still getting smallpox, that should tell you something about how dangerous a smallpox outbreak was. Because they would go through that and with still rolling the dice of getting it from getting that variolation, but they'd still do it. That's life. You guys follow me on this? I told you one of the principles that I think is most important about history is learning to be grateful for what you have now. And I hope that all you guys will be thankful the next time that lady walks over to you with the needle, just come over to you and she'll be like, we're going to get you not having the flu. And guys, listen to me. Go get your flu shots. All right. Go get your flu shots. How else is the government going to get that chip inside of you? All right. Actually, I know like 6 or 7 ways, but I'm in the Illuminati. I'm not allowed to tell you guys. So when we talk about the colonies, we talk about conflict because there's constant conflict there. And last week we talked about King Philip's War, this war this big showdown between the Native Americans in New England and the European settlers there. 5% of the entire population dies in this. The Europeans pull it out in the end after losing big time up front. But ultimately, it marks an end to the Native American presence in New England. At the same time, wait, did I say 1676? I'm afraid I said 1776. That was different. 1676 is when King Philip's War ends. At the same time, you have a major conflict also happening down in Jamestown. Remember, these are not places that are really close to each other. And at this time, they're certainly not thinking of themselves as like both being colonies. They're thinking of themselves as being, if you're in Virginia, you're like, I'm in Virginia. If you're up north in one of the New England colonies, you're thinking about yourself from being from there. Nevertheless, at almost exactly the same time, Virginia breaks out into a big dispute. Let me give you the background on this. As tobacco proves to be a source of profit, no longer are you having to struggle to get people to come to Virginia. As the establishment gets set up, there's more knowledge of the area. More and more people come to the region. And in fact, from 1640 to 1660, you can see that the population, the European population of Virginia, goes from 8,000 to over 40,000 people. That may not sound like a lot to you, but remember, most of these people are trying to get large farms to grow tobacco on. So they are spreading out. And of course, this leads to conflict with the Native Americans in the region. The British, in alliance with the leaders of what by this point becomes the Virginia colony, they worked together and they managed to kind of put a cap on like basically the problems they're having with the Native Americans there. I don't really know how to explain it like in overly simplified terms, but basically they worked out a deal that the Europeans said, or the English said, we won't go any further west than this line. And if we promise not to go any further west than that line, you guys don't attack us, we won't take any more of your land. And the colonial elites, the leaders of Virginia, these are the ones that got the best land. These are the ones that are doing great. They try to enforce this. They say, no going past that. But the problem is, y'all remember I told you that they're bringing indentured servants over to work the land? Yeah. And why do indentured servants come? Because they got no hope in England. And what does it mean if they come over as an indentured servant? They'll work for like 5 years, but then what? What do they think? What do they think? What do they expect to do? Are they going to go back to England? What do they want? Somebody unmute. Tell me. What do they plan to do after they serve their contract?
Start their own farm and make more money.
Excellent, Taylor. That's what they're there to do. They're essentially investing in themselves, right? They're working for someone else, and they expect to get land there when they're done. That was the whole deal. This starts to become a problem because these people got nothing, and they're getting freed, and they're being told, sorry, there's no more land, and you can't go past that western border. So you end up with, gradually over time, more and more essentially unemployed young men who have nothing to lose. And they're furious because they feel like they got brought over there under the promise they were going to get some land. And now, not because they can't go there themselves physically, but because they're told they can't, they're going to lose out on everything that they risked so much for. So this leads to a rebellion. A guy named Nathaniel Bacon here. Nathaniel Bacon. This guy ends up leading a group of largely these folks who are angry at the powers that be inside of Virginia. And they lead a rebellion against William Berkeley, who's the governor of Virginia. And they almost bring down the government of Virginia. Bacon actually, as they're like being pretty successful, Bacon gets sick and dies. It's not a very large group of people actually at this point. It's like 1,000 people, I think, totally involved. But in the end, it shakes up the colony. The leaders of the colony are like, good Lord, like this is a problem. And so if you were looking at the world saying indentured servants are going to be a social problem for us, what might you do if you ran that colony? Yeah, get rid of indentured servitude. You might not be able to get rid of the actual people that are already there, but what you can do is you can say, no more. No more indentured servants, because this is going to lead to long-term stress. And this, friends, is the point at which Virginia begins to change. Because you have major landholders. Those major landholders had people working that land for them who would come over and guarantee to be there for like 5 years or so. And they could constantly keep them fed and keep them clothed, right? But now they can't do that. Where do you think they might look to find a group of people who will come over, work their land, but never leave and look for their own? You guys can unmute and say it. I like it when you guys mouth it, like most of you guys mouth it.
Slaves.
Yeah, slavery. They're going to look to slavery. And they've got a model for them right down in South Carolina. And so it's at this point that you see Virginia begin to pick up really the slave plantation system. We're going to talk later on in the semester. I'm going to give an entire lecture just about slavery, about how it works. I'm going to tie together a lot of what we've been learning in the class into that theme. But for now, what you should know is that as a result of Bacon's Rebellion over the next few decades, Virginia's structure and their legal codes all of this is going to be transformed into a legal system that upholds slavery and is in the interests of plantation holders, because the wealthiest people have a lot of land. That's where they turn. And, I've said this before. I just want to tell you now, again, what you think of probably when you think of slavery is you think of like one thing. You're like, oh yeah, slavery. Like it wasn't. It transforms. Slavery in the United States in the colonial period looks very different than slavery in the United States in the 19th century. One of the big changes is going to be cotton. Nobody's growing cotton at this point. But eventually, once the southern lands, currently Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, once those lands open up, they're going to take cotton with them. And that is going to be, even though you guys, I hope, already know that slavery is a deep, deep moral just breakdown. It's horrific. I think when I explained to you guys what happens with slavery in that lecture, I remember learning this and just being shocked. So here you have Virginia's jumping on board. That. All right. There we go. Nathaniel Bacon. Bacon's Rebellion. It's not just what happens when you cook bacon with no grease screen and no shirt on. That'll hurt too. How do I know? All right. So let's kind of bring it all back together. 1750. All right. 1750. It was a good year, right? You guys remember 1750? Who remember 17? Oh, you guys are so young now. You guys don't remember 17. You guys don't even remember the Alamo anymore. How are you guys going to remember it? Never forget the Alamo. You remember the Alamo? No, you don't remember it. You're too young. But 1750, way before the Alamo. Here's what the map is looking like. Now, again, we got to be aware of what's modern and what's not here. Wait, I didn't say that before. I can't say again. Let me stop there. Okay, so when looking at this map, the state lines here, they're not there at the time. This is just to give you some perspective. But overall, what you see here is a map of North America, and the shades here will tell you where each empire had gotten to. Now, you notice down here, you've got Spain. Spain had essentially come up through Mexico. They had searched all this land around here, but they eventually go down there. They come up into what is modern New Mexico, Arizona, all of this area. And so they're pushing in towards there. They're eventually going to seize this area over here too. You've got the English, which, as you guys know, are coming across the East Coast and pushing further inward. But what I have not told you about is the French. The French have come also. And they have come here into the northern part. And whereas the British have settled along the coasts, the French have come in further north through these rivers into the Great Lakes region and settled there. For France, it's a bit of a different story, because the French, they settle people. Don't get me wrong, but they're chasing furs. That's what a lot of the French occupation of this area is doing. Furs are highly valued in Europe. It's very cold in a lot of Europe, cold winters. These have been hunted out. At the same time that this is happening over here, the Russians are chasing furs across Siberia, which explains why the Russians eventually take over that area. So the French are on this model. And so what they've done is they've come up through here, taken this area, and they are moving down this area, which is the Ohio Valley here, the Ohio River Valley. Now, maybe if you guys today ran into somebody, you ever run into somebody you know from back in another country? Like when you're from a country, you ever go to another country and run into somebody you know from back in your home country? You guys ever had that happen before? No, you guys are looking at me like that's happened to me multiple times. Yeah. Dude, I've run. I walked past an ex-girlfriend in Prague. I was like, what? That can't be her. And then I was like, I wanted to look again, but I was like, no, I'm good. I'm glad I haven't seen her. And hopefully that wasn't her, but I don't want her to know it's me. I ran into a buddy of mine when I was in college. I ran into a buddy of mine from UNC Charlotte in the streets of Amsterdam. just fun, man. I was like, what are you doing here? He's like, what are you doing here? And we just partied that night. It was like odd, right? I ran into a buddy of mine from college when I was in Moscow at the Moscow Ballet in the former like Palace of the Soviets. Like, and he came over to my house for dinner. It's crazy. You travel enough, eventually you'll start running into people from back home. I know that sounds weird that that's happened a lot. I know you probably are like, what? But I don't know, man. Odds are. Okay, so when I saw those people, aside from the weird ex-girlfriend, when I saw my friend Citron in Amsterdam, I was like, what are you doing here? Like, and it was so much fun, right? Okay, so now the French and the British are both in the New World. And they're both like coming across and they run into each other in the Ohio River Valley. What do you guys think they did? Were they like, what are you doing here? And they're like, what are you doing here? Do you think, I don't know why the English guy had a Southern accent in that, but like, why, you know, you think they're going to be having fun? They're going to be like, whoa, let's have it. What do you guys think is going to happen?
A war.
Yeah, very good. That's excellent, Jenna. A war, because they're not happy to see each other there. Because the problem is this. The English are like, that's mine. And the French are like, no, no, it is mine. And they are going to go to war with each other over this because that's the way empires go. Funny seeing you here because this, yeah, it's supposed to be mine. As we move forward, the thing I want you guys to understand is that you know the American Revolution happened. In our national narrative, it is a fundamental story that we all hear. We might take different things from it, but it's something that most Americans know. It matters. I want you to, as we go through from this point forward until we get through with the revolution, I want you to be thinking about why it happens. It's too simplistic, the story you mostly hear about this. Oh yeah, one day they were like, oh, freedom. I love it. Let's get some. And the king was like, no, you cannot have this freedom. And so we just kicked his ass, man. We're all mad about it. You know what I'm saying, bro? He's telling us we couldn't be free. So we just whooped that ass. Like, that's the story, basically, that you hear as if it's so simple. And it's not. And if you just follow this through, because it's nuts that it ever happened. What if I told you guys that the United States was going to team up with Thailand, North Korea, and El Salvador to fight, I don't know, Guatemala? What would you guys think? You'd be like, those guys, like, that's kind of a weird alliance. Yeah, Puritans, plantation owners. People do not see this coming. You know it's coming, but pay attention to why it happens. This was not preordained. Okay. And let me spell this out a little bit more explicitly for you. So before this period we're talking about right now, this period where the colonies are going to actually come together, beginning in the 1770s, really. In the entire history of the English colonies, the 13 original colonies, there had been 3 ever attempts to get them to come together on anything. And I don't memorize all these. This is not something where I'm going to be like, yeah, what year was the New England Confederation? Don't worry about that stuff. I want to walk through these so that I can explain to you how just tiny these little moments were. The biggest one is called the New England Confederation, right? That is an alliance the colonies make. It's a military alliance. You guys remember King Philip's War? When the Native American threat was large there in New England? They created a structure by which, Connecticut and Massachusetts and all these New England colonies could come together and coordinate a war if something like that happened. It happened. And remember, King Philip's War, 1676. Notice this. 8 years later, the New England Confederation is done. Its purpose is, by and large, not there anymore. Shortly after that, though, there's kind of a fleeting moment where the Crown in England decides that the colonies need to be better overseen. And so they appoint like a governor, basically, to oversee what they call the Dominion of New England. So they'll all be under like one royal supervisor. It fails miserably. It is wildly unpopular. It gets people worked up. And so they pull the plug on that. 3 years. So there's the 2 before this. Now in 1754 is going to be the next one. So you're already looking at the fact that you're looking like, over 60 years here before you get to the next attempt to do this. 1754. It's called the Albany Congress. This is in response to what you just saw on that map. The English and the French beginning to collide in the Ohio River Valley. The awareness that this could cause a war. And the awareness that, you guys remember what I've been telling you about how the Native Americans have been treated by European colonists? You remember that? Okay, so how likely do you think it is that the Native Americans are going to want to help out the English? Might be kind of slim, right? Not exactly a positive history there. The French, on the other hand, because a lot of their operation is looking for furs, they don't set up and farm things, so they actually got better relationship with a lot of the Native American tribes, just by the very nature of what they do. So some people in the colony start saying, look, I have a feeling that a war might break out. And also, call me crazy, but I'm also starting to think that maybe if there's a war, the Native Americans are going to side with the French instead of us. So maybe we should bond together to talk about it with them, try to bring things together, maybe work out deals, tell them that we're sorry, something like that, just make treaties. So they call this Congress. The person who leads this charge is a retired printmaker living in Philadelphia named Benjamin Franklin. You guys ever seen this graphic, Join or Die? You guys ever seen this? It's very famous. Most people associate it with the American Revolution. It's not an American Revolutionary drawing. Franklin actually drew this himself and published it in his newspapers. He drew this originally to try to convince people to come to this Albany Congress, to bring the colonies together to work out a deal with the natives and to essentially bring security collectively. That was his attempt to pull them together. And it failed. A couple of northern states show up, Pennsylvania shows up. The Iroquois Confederacy sends delegates. Doesn't last. Because no one's oh yeah, why are we going to even talk with those other colonists, right? They have no history of collaboration. They don't think of themselves as being in this together. Virginians think of themselves as Virginians, and South Carolinians think of themselves as South Carolinians, and Massachusetts people think of themselves as Massachusetts. What do you call them? I don't know, but they think of themselves like whatever it is. And so there's just nothing in common. And 20 years before this revolution breaks out, one attempt to get them around the same table, people are like, what are you even talking about? So, as it turns out, historically, Benjamin Franklin was someone you should listen to, because his warning that if there was a war, we might have to fight both the French and the Indians, well, turns out he's right about it. Hence the French and Indian War. Now, it's not super simple. Some of the tribes, some of the Cherokee do fight with us, right? There are tribes that side with the Americans, the American colonists, but it's not, it's far from the majority, right? A lot of them do join the French. This is part of a global war that is going down between the French and the British. It starts largely in these American colonies over the Ohio River Valley. 2 years later, it has taken over there, fighting all over the world. It comes to be known as the 7 Years' War. But the French and Indian War is one front of that actually began before the larger war happened. And the British win, and they win big. This is in spite of the fact that a very young officer who was given his first command in the Virginia militia leads his troops out into the Ohio River Valley, engages the French. A diplomat actually gets assassinated, murdered somehow. Then this young officer leads his troops to build one of the worst forts in world history, a fort known as Fort Necessity, with no roof, so when it rains, all your gunpowder gets wet. And then at the end of it, this young officer can't read French. They give him a surrender treaty in French. He has a buddy look at it, and he's like, it's fine. He signs it. And it turns out that officer signs an official document saying that he's responsible for murdering the French diplomat. That's pretty bad. You guys know what they say? Don't shoot the messenger. They shot the messenger. And then this guy was like, yeah, we did it. We meant to. That guy's name was George Washington, who was overseeing all of that. He will surrender at Fort Necessity. He will surrender to the French. This is kind of the very spark of the beginning of the French and Indian War. Not a real promising outlook for this young officer from Virginia. What he doesn't know is it will be the only time in his entire life he surrenders. There's a lesson in that for you. All he knew was that he blew it. But he moved forward. At the end of this French and Indian War, The British Parliament accepts a treaty. And here's what they get. You guys ready? You guys ready? You guys ready? Look at this map before and after. Can you guys see this map? Look at this. Oh my goodness. Before they were like, we've just got these colonies and we kind of say this is ours. And the French have all this. Okay. Now look at this one over here. Oh, everything to the Mississippi. Everything to the Mississippi. Now, don't ask the people who actually live there because they're Native Americans. This is going to be a common theme where they're like, we got it. It's ours. And the people who live there are going to be like, excuse me. And they're going to be like, I'm sorry. We don't listen to you. I mean, here, just sign this. Well, probably. Just kidding. We're not even going to follow it. Just sign it anyway. But look at this. British holdings in North America grow tremendously. You see this proclamation line of 1763 here? This is a formalization of that line that I told you about, across which no settlers were supposed to go. It was a deal with the Native Americans, right? So they formalized this here. How awesome is this, guys? The British. I mean, we're British at this time, so you can be cool with it. All this new land. Well, here's the problem. When you guys moved out, how many of you guys live in your own like apartments? Okay, cool. Do you remember when you moved out and you were like, look at this room. I got this room. I got a living room. This is amazing. And do you guys remember how your parents were like, it's going to be expensive. And you were like, I'm good. It's fine. And then you realize that the bigger your apartment or your house is, the more your heating bill is. Right? And you got to pay insurance. Oh, no. Turns out, if you got an apartment that was 3 times as big, all your base expenses will be even higher. That's what the British experience. The British have borrowed money from all over the world to fight this war. They borrowed money from the Dutch. They borrowed money from the lenders in Spain. And they owe it. And at this time, you got to pay it back fast. If you don't pay, if the British don't pay it back, even though they won, they don't pay back their debts on time. And the French do. If there's another war, guess what? British, nobody's going to loan the British money. The French will have the upper hand, so you've got to pay off that debt. It's a problem the Americans are going to experience here in a couple of decades too, but we'll get there. So they say, okay, we've got this debt that we paid to fight this war to essentially keep the colonists from being taken by the French. We've also got an additional cost, and this is like one of the funny things. I don't know if you guys ever heard this about the American Revolution and one of the big problems between the U.S. or between the colonists and the British. The problem is that proclamation line of 1763 right there. The British are like, we will not let people move past that. Native Americans like, look, all you tribes over there, look, we will keep them on the other side. Do not attack our villages, not raid things across that line, and we'll do the same to you. And that's a sweet treaty you can work out from London. But you know what's hard? Keeping all them people from going past that line. Because the further inland you get, you are far away from the coast. You're peeking over the hills, looking over there going, seems like a lot of empty land over there. Then everybody's like, we're here. And they're like, I said, it seems like there's a lot of empty land there. And they won't stop. People won't stop going past that line. It's so bad that the British now have to send troops to patrol that border to try to keep the peace. And that's expensive. So from the British perspective, they got all this massive war debt. Now they've got this additional cost of maintaining the territories. And they are paying people to stop, the soldiers to stop Americans from going past those mountains. Because if that happens, there'll be another war. And the British say, hey guys, we spent a lot of money on this. Now we've left you guys alone to do what you wanted to for a long time. But now we owe some money. We spent a lot of it protecting you colonists. And so we're going to need you guys to help us pay for it. You know how, you ever heard somebody say it's not what you say, it's how you say it? You guys ever heard that line before? Anybody here who's been in a relationship for more than 6 months has definitely heard that line before. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. You see, the British were like, hey, isn't it reasonable that you guys help us pay some of these costs? Maybe if you'd talked about it, that might have been one thing. But instead, in 1764, the British just passed a tax called the sugar tax. They don't ask the colonists. They just say, surprise, we're going to be taxing the sugar coming into the colonies now. To the colonists, this is a violation of their political rights. You passed a tax from London? You didn't ask anybody? It's going to be the first step in a series of miscommunications that's going to eventually lead the colonists to rebel. One last thing. You may have known this from the reading. But I'll repeat it because I think it's a great story. You know how Americans think, like, America, rum. Rum's not American drink, right? Whiskey, right? Whiskey. When I went to Russia, I'd take people Jack Daniels. I'd take people, they'd be like, Amerikansky whiskey. You know? They'd be like pumped because that is like American. That did not become an American thing till during the Revolution and then after. You guys know what rum's made from? Sugar. One response to this sugar tax is going to be to boycott purchases of British goods, and particularly those that come from sugar. And in response, all these good old boys out in the countryside start taking a little bit of their corn, a little bit of their wheat, putting that in a still, and making whiskey. That's something you can make with what you grow in the American colonies. They make whiskey out of it, and in boycotting rum, Americans start drinking whiskey. And boy, do they. They drink a lot of it. We'll get to that later. But that's the lecture for the day, guys. Thank you guys for being in my class. We're getting to the revolution, man. You guys aren't going to believe it, but we're going to get some independence here. Thanks.